My name is Jeff Cummings. I'm the interim superintendent president here at Copper Mountain College, and it is an honor and a privilege to be here with you this evening and to be hosting and moderating the first of 7 of the Black Rock lecture series. So welcome, and this is the first of 7 of the 2014-15 Black Rock lecture series. Tonight is Joshua Tree National Park, State of the Park. And we have with us David Smith, Joshua Tree National Park Superintendent. Andrea Compton, Chief of Resources. And Jenny Albrink, Chief of Interpretation. I'm not sure how we're doing with sound here. It's going to explode any minute.
Turn that off for a second.
It's not my mic.
I don't have it on off. I don't.
No, those mics are mine up there.
Okay. Kevin's going to come in and save the day for us. Hello.
Wow, that was
Look at there. Woo! So just a little bit about the format this evening. We're going to have about 10 minutes apiece for each of our panelists this evening to make their opening comments, and then we'll have probably about 20 to 30 minutes of questions that we've prepared, and then you have an opportunity to ask questions as well. There are questionnaires on the table there, and there will be some floating around. If you have a question for our panelists, please fill out one of these and raise it up, and they'll come pick it up, and we'll get your question answered if we can. So first of all, I want to start the evening by just expressing my appreciation for the partnership between Copper Mountain College and the Joshua Tree National Park. As you know, our community college students learn by doing, and having the opportunity to function as part of the scientific teams that are working in the park and being able to work on projects and research and problem-solving activities that happen in the park is invaluable for our students to gain the skills and the education they need to be successful in life. So I really want to just thank the Park Service for allowing us to work with you folks and to provide students and to provide that opportunity for our students in the park. So thank you very much. So David, do you want to just start with a brief comment about?
Let's get to work, man.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So can we go?
Sure.
Okay. So my 10 minutes are now?
Go.
We're going with my 10 minutes.
And you're in charge, so you can have,
Wow. I'm not in charge of the college, so everyone, thanks for coming out tonight. It's great to see so many people. It's especially great to see our partners over here. I don't know if you're familiar with the Mojave Desert Land Trust. They are doing incredible work right now to help. I cannot say enough about what they are accomplishing as far as the inholdings inside the park. Dealing with buffer zones around the park to help protect it. Without friends like them, I don't think we could survive. The association, they do the interpretation that we can't do. They do the education we can't do. They raise tremendous amount of funds. Our volunteers over here, what did we get last year? We got 20 full-time employees out of our volunteers. That's 20 people earning $30,000 or $40,000 a year that we didn't have to come up with out of our budget. So amazing people. And then I saw Josar back there. Josar, lots of good friends here tonight that we could not survive without. So we're talking tonight about some of the challenges that are facing Joshua Tree. Can everyone hear me all right back there? Great. We're talking about some of the challenges that are facing Joshua Tree from my perspective. I've now been here, this is my 20th day. I know everything that's going on in a park that's almost the size of Delaware. So I've got that down. But quickly it became apparent to me that there were some challenges. I had the honor to work here about 15 18 years ago as a volunteer, as a seasonal interpreter, and then I got my first permanent job at Joshua Tree National Park. So, it's in my heart. I camped here when I was 7 at Jumbo for the first time. I started climbing here when I was about 15. I had a friend who could, take a car over the hill so we could come climbing here. I love this park. I love the resource. It's very special to my heart. But when I came here a month ago, and I saw the dearth of interpretive opportunities that we had for our public, when I saw the weeds coming up on the side of the road on the way to Keys View, when I saw the state of our campgrounds, when I saw our maintenance crew struggling to pick up garbage while at the same time clean the toilets, while at the same time do all the vandalism repair they had to do, when I saw our law enforcement, or lack thereof, being able to protect the park, I realized that the one crucial thing that we're missing right now are people. Operations. We've got, this year so far, we've had about 1.2 million visitors inside the park. If we continue with our same trajectory this year, we will have 1.5 million visitors in the park. That will be a record. Never in 78 years has this park had that many people inside of it. We lack the human resources amongst our paid staff to actually accomplish the basic needs that need to be done inside that park right now. So that's my main concern. I'm concerned about the staff we have right now because they've been working their asses off to make sure that everything gets done. Maintenance is the worst. They work so hard. You tell them, no, we're going to close this off right now because we don't have the resources to deal with it. They will sneak in there at night or at the end of their shift to clean those areas and make sure they're taken care of. And it adds up stress-wise for all of our staff because they're trying to accomplish so many different things. And, these guys, they're working till 6 or 7 o'clock at night sometimes, and it adds to this stress level, this continual stress level. Don't let anyone ever tell you that civil servants don't work hard for their money. They've got convictions of the heart because that's the only reason they wanted to work for the Park Service in the first place. By and large, most of them they all got degrees, but they probably have masters or PhDs too, and they're not earning a tremendous amount of money. They do it because they love it and they work really hard and they put in way more than 40 hours a week. So I am most concerned resource-wise about my staff right now, and I'm going to do whatever I can to support them. And I'm going to look for as many opportunities as possible to bring in more staff into the park as well. The director of the National Park Service came out 2 months ago. He took all the superintendents aside on a conference call, and he said, our centennial's coming up. We're 100 years old. We got to do something, but there's no way that Congress is ever going to do anything for us. If anything, our budgets are going to go down. So we're going to have to figure out some way to make this work. You will have to partner with whoever you can find out there. You will have to find and work with your local businesses. You're going to have to find more volunteers. You're going to have incredible friends like we've got over there against the wall to be able to do this. And we're going to have to consider fee increases inside of some of our parks. So Joshua Tree is one of 113 parks in the system of 401 parks that charges a fee. So we're going to do a series of public hearings and meetings over the next 2 months to explore whether we increase our entrance fee by $5 and whether we look at increasing our camping fees inside the park. As someone who grew up camping in parks and someone who loves national parks and someone who really believes in public land, it hurts my soul to actually go and ask people to pay for more money to go into their parks. They own those parks. That's the beauty of our country. Our Congress and our president gave us these parks through our public laws, but the fact of the matter is right now we don't have the financial resources to keep those parks going. So during the next couple months you're going to hear these pleas. We're going to be talking to the public. I would encourage you to reach out to me and tell me how you feel about them. It's not a bad deal, just so you know. Most of the folks in the United States who are over 62 have the Golden Age passport, so they're getting in free anyways. Our veterans all get in free right now into the national parks. Most of us can afford the charge, but there's some of us who can't, and there's no doubt about that. So that's what really concerns me. How do we get them into the parks? So money concerns me. The morale of my staff concerns me right now. And then we had the government shutdown about a year ago. I don't know if any of you remember that or not. I would encourage you to talk to some of the merchants in Joshua Tree and Yucca Valley and 29 Palms who watched their businesses almost fold during that process. I would encourage you to stop by the Pinto Y maintenance area and see all the signs that people wrote on with red spray paint and saying vile things about how upset they were that the park was closed. I would encourage you to talk to any Park Service employee who was at Stater Brothers and was verbally assaulted by folks that were so upset about their parks being closed. We live in a very interesting time, you know, where we're talking about we can close parks for 16 days and no one is terribly fazed except for all the businesses and people that enjoy and depend on them. We're living in a time where you listen to talk radio, or you watch television, or you read the newspaper, and you hear congressmen and senators saying, you know, I think this park could be better served if it was private, or if it was managed by the city, or by the county, or by the state. Well, coming from California like I have, in Arizona, I've seen what happens to state budgets. I've seen California have to close down half of their state parks because they couldn't afford it. And also, places like Joshua Tree, places like the John Muir House, places like Manzanar, I mean, those are our American story. These are things that resonate for every single one of you in some way. You know, I remember the first time I went to the MLK site. I was working the Olympics back in '96. I was on a security detail there, and I did my 12-hour shift, and I ran down to the national park because I'm like a busman on a holiday, because I had to see the MLK site in Atlanta. And I go in there, and I didn't know a lot about civil rights at that time, but I broke down and started crying at that national park. First time I'd ever cried at a national park site before, because I'd never thought about that, and it resonated for me. And I think for most of you, all these national parks have significance. So those are my concerns, those are what I'm worried about right now, and those are things I'm going to be working my ass off to make sure that they're taken care of. But I'm joined tonight by two of my good friends and colleagues, our Chief of Interpretation, Jennifer Albrink. She's going to take over from me now and tell you what some of her concerns are.
Okay height. Can you hear me okay? My name is Jenny Albrink, and I am the Chief of Interpretation and Resource Education. And I tack that on the end because when I started in the National Park Service, people used to ask me what language I spoke. Well, you're an interpreter. What do you speak? Well, my French is really bad, and I can speak enough Spanish to order a nice cold beverage, but that's about it. So I told them, I speak for the park, I speak for the resource. And finally, now that I'm at Joshua Tree, as Dr. Seuss once said, I speak for the trees. My division truly is the voice of the resource. We give the resource voice for people who otherwise might just come in and drive by and not truly find that connection with what they're seeing. We give the resource a voice. And so when Kevin asked me to be part of this panel, I was shocked, I was humbled, and I was honored because I thought, wow, I can share what my division does. I can share what challenges we face in trying to give voice to that amazing resource in the park. And I thought about it. I thought, what really is the greatest challenge? I mean, is it budget? Is it staffing? For our division, what is the greatest challenge we as interpreters, as educators, face in the next century? In an agency that was born almost 100 years ago, how do we remain relevant? And it's that word that came to me. That is our biggest challenge in my division. It's making the resource relevant for the next generation and the generation after that. I have an 8-year-old daughter. I want her to come back to Joshua Tree with her grandchildren someday and find the same beauty and the same relevance and the same passion that I feel when I go out on a trail. So how do you do that? In today's changing society with social media, and I mean, I admit it, I was in the bathroom looking at my email and checking my Facebook. We want immediate gratification. We want our information now, and we want it immediately. We want it perfect. How can you compete with that? How can you compete when you know already that your national parks aren't quite there at reflecting the face of America? What do you do? How do you remain relevant? And David touched on a lot of them already. The main thing I would say to you is partnerships. I mean, look at the people who are over here. We have so many partners. We're here today because of the partnership we have with Joshua Tree National Park Association and the Desert Institute, incredible organizations. We couldn't run our visitor centers without them. We wouldn't be here talking to you tonight without them. Copper Mountain College, we're talking about doing astronomy programs in the future with them. Amazing things when you leverage those partnerships, when you work as a team. Our communities are our partners, our educational institutions are our partners, local businesses, friends groups. People love the park. We have friends groups popping up all over the place because people want to step in and do things that we can't do. And so partnerships is huge. One example of a partnership that some of you may or may not be aware of is the Joshua Tree Visitor Center right down the road. Joshua Tree National Park Association bought that visitor center. We run it in cooperation with them, but they bought that building. We wouldn't have the busiest visitor center that serves our public if it wasn't for our partner. And so thank you guys. We wouldn't have it without you. And we're working together on fabricating and installing new exhibits for the Centennial. Incredible exhibits. If you want to see them in the next couple of weeks, they'll be available, the design level that we're at will be available on our website. So you can comment as well. And we hope people will go into that visitor center and come out ready to go into the park entrance with a renewed idea of just how special the place is. So partnerships is one thing that I think will help us remain relevant. That's a big challenge. Another is another type of partnership, and that's with our volunteers. And I know I see at least one volunteer over here, Joe Sar in the back. In 2013, there was a goal of 40,000 volunteer hours that we wanted to meet in the park. 40,000 hours, that's huge, it's unattainable. We have 43,000, amazing. So we said, well, heck, for 2014, we're gonna do 45,000. The numbers came in last week from Washington. We tallied them all up, we figured out all of the numbers. We were just over 47,000 volunteer hours. I can take no credit for that. Now our volunteer coordinator, George Landcan, he's amazing. Some of you probably know him and work with him. 47,000 hours. People who are so dedicated to Joshua Tree National Park that they gave their time to help keep that relevance for the park in the future. Another thing we have coming up that it's not so much a challenge, but it's kind of a call to action for us, is developing a new long-range interpretive plan. The one we have, very good, but older. It's not really meeting the needs of tomorrow's visitors. We're going to look at our interpretive themes in a new way. Rather than look at them in the box that we were all taught, anyone out here who's ever done interpretation, you know, you look at your enabling legislation, you look at what you're told to talk about, and that's what you tell people. We can't do that anymore. We have to look at the national stage. We have to look at things that are affecting the country nationally and also affecting Joshua Tree and bring those into what we talk to people about. We have to talk about climate change. We have to go down into the Coachella Valley and we have to talk about Latina heritage. We have to ask people to share their stories with us. We can't just tell them what we want them to know. We have to ask them what they want to know. And we have to talk to all of our visitors and interpret with them, not for them or at them. I mean, I was raised in the interpretive school where you stood on your soapbox and you told people what you thought they needed to know about the park. We didn't ask. Today we ask. And so that will help us remain relevant in the future. And then finally, the thing that's the nearest and dearest to my heart, the thing that I've left for the end because I feel, having worked in a lot of parks across the system, we are the most successful in our education program. It is one of the most effective, far-reaching, curriculum-based school program that I've seen in the National Park Service. And I mean, I've worked at teeny tiny Minuteman Missile in South Dakota and huge Grand Canyon in Arizona, and ours surpasses those. It's incredible. At its peak, we once touched 24,000 children's lives in 1 year. Yes, it's dropped to about 14,000, but how do we keep that touch? How do we remain relevant to those future stewards of the park? And we have several things in place, from distance learning, equipment that will allow us to beam our ranger, educating a class not just within driving distance of the park, but across the state, across the country. I mean, why not across the world? At my last park, we used to have, once a year, we used to beam our ranger into China. There's no reason that we can't share the California desert, share Joshua Tree with people around the world, not just as far as we can drive in one day. And then we also have a partnership with a group that some of you may have heard of called Nature Bridge. Nature Bridge is the primary nonprofit for residential curriculum-based education with the National Park Service, and they want to come to Joshua Tree. What that would allow us to do is really round out our education program. It would allow us to go into the classroom via technology, go into the classroom in person, bring the students into the park, and then through Nature Bridge, bring students into the park and let them have not just a day trip, a couple of hours, but an overnight experience, 2 days, 3 days, a week at Joshua Tree National Park. Can you imagine? I can't imagine letting my 8-year-old do that, but you know, I mean, that's because I'm a helicopter mom. So when I think about the things that are right there that allow us to remain relevant in those children's lives and their future, it brings me back to my very first seasonal training at Grand Canyon, many more years ago than I'll admit. Somebody quoted Terry Tempest Williams to me. I probably won't get it quite right. But when we think about immersing not just our regular park visitors who come in, but the people who only visit us via the internet, the children that we can reach through all of this new technology, and also bringing them here to actually go out and camp in the park and teach them how to pitch a tent, teach them how to hike. I'm trying to remember exactly what she said, so I'm going to paraphrase. She said that interpretation, what we do, what the people that I'm so blessed to work with every day do, interpretation requires the precision of a scientist and the soul of a poet. It is when words have muscle and wings. To talk about that muscle, to talk about that science that we're trying to interpret for park visitors, we have our Chief of Resource Management, Andrea Compton.
Good evening, everyone. I wanted to thank you for coming here tonight as well. And, you know, I'm now able to follow two people whose careers focus on interpretation and talking and presenting. This is their professional. Now you get the ecologist. And you get data. So I did want to thank everyone for being here. And one of the things I wanted to start with was a brief explanation of what Chief of Resources means. That's often a question I get is, well, you have a park, you create a park.
Talk into it.
You have a park, you create a park, the park should just take care of itself, right? What a great thing. It's just there, the land's preserved. And what I wanted to present was it actually takes a little bit more than that. Why we have all the ologists that we do. The people who study biology, the ones who study archaeology, the ones who study geology, all those different components and how they come together. And it goes back to actually the Organic Act for the National Park Service that focuses on conserving natural and historic items for the enjoyment of future generations. And not just the enjoyment of future generations, but unimpaired. So what that means is you have to take how the park is today and make sure that 100 years from now or 200 years from now, people are still able to enjoy that. So that's part of what Resources does. So I wanted to give you some examples, starting with real smaller, localized impacts, and then moving up to kind of global impacts, to give you an idea of the different things that Resources work on more specifically. So to kind of start out with, one of the things, it's again, some of what I'm going to talk about is balance, right? In the Organic Act, we talked about this balance between conserving or preserving resources, but for the enjoyment of people. And that's what all these examples are about. How do you reach that balance? And for this first example, I wanted to talk about looking at graffiti. And this is one of those cultural things that the other two have mentioned. There are cultural differences in graffiti now. There are some amazing graffiti artists that are developing through metropolitan areas, things like that, but we have a different message. And our message is that graffiti is not art in a national park. So we have these kind of voices of expression, but that is not the expression that we use in the national park. We're focused on that natural experience. So we have trails crews, cultural crews, who get those paint etchings back to looking like natural conditions in the park. And sometimes this, I say the cultural crew, is because some of these are on rock art. You know, I think some of the damages that we see from people, they're not always intentional. Sometimes it's just a version of having fun, but it has unintended impacts beyond that. So it's looking at those a little bit closer. You've also heard about Barker Dam. I think people are aware of that. Just to give people an update on that, we actually have some conservators and some people that we have been consulting with at a national level to how do we get the dam looking back to original condition without all those signatures in it and without affecting the integrity of the dam itself. It's not as simple as just smacking some cement up there and covering up the signatures. It's because that could affect the integrity of it in the future. So you have a lot of things to consider there as well. The next things I wanted to go out a little bit and talk about boundary issues, boundary concerns. All around the park, we have places where people are coming into the edges of the park with vehicles. Sometimes it's a motorcycle, one trip only. Sometimes it's a more regular access. And again, I think this is something that's not always intentional. Maybe they don't know where the boundary of the park is. Maybe they don't know when they're getting to that National Park Service edge. But you can see some of the impacts. This is one of a more affected site. It's looking a little gray, must be a bright sunny day. But there is dirt impacts to fragile soils, to rock art or other cultural sites, certainly to the vegetation. You know, 100 years from now when they're using hovercrafts, we won't see this kind of stuff, but we need to get it repaired before they get to that point, before it gets worse. So these are other types of things that we work with as well. Continuing to move out and look at a little bit bigger scale yet, you know, we have a metropolitan area of Los Angeles, 18 million people in that area. Coachella Valley is expected to be 500,000 people by the middle part of this century. So we start to see influences from that. We start to see pollution. Joshua Tree actually has the worst record in the National Park Service for ozone. And a lot of this comes from transportation pollution that drifts our direction. You know, that balance, that's not so good for people who are recreating to be with bad ozone levels. How do you balance that? You know, some of the things we have to mitigate for them, or we do the best we can. You know, earlier I gave some examples of things we go out and try to fix. In this case, I wanted to give an example. We have a climate-friendly action plan that we did in 2010, and the focus is reducing our carbon footprint. How do we reduce the amount of greenhouse gases that the park is creating? We can't always control everything that happens with 18 million people, but we can with some of our messages and some of the things we do by example. So some of those include solar panels, putting things on two sides of paper, just everything from little things to bigger steps. And some of the bigger steps also include renewable energy. So we do have solar panels at the park, but solar and other development adjacent to the park is one other thing where it's again that balance. You know, we have solar panels at the park, but sometimes when we have solar development next to the park, how we respond is how do those developments affect the visitors in the park? How could they affect the resources in the park? And we've had some big developments proposed near the park. Over in this area, there was a 63,000 acre wind farm proposed at one point. Down kind of in that area, there's a little section here that the BLM has identified as a solar energy zone. That is a place where 80% of that area will be developed with some types of solar technology. So that has an impact for the park as well. There's a 4,000 acre solar panel farm that's almost completed. There's another 1,000 acre farm right below that. So that affects the visitor experience, right? That's no longer a wilderness experience of long open views. That's no longer an experience of, night skies, especially during construction, dark night skies. So we try to work with the BLM, work with the developers, and try to explain and try to minimize some of the impacts to the park that could occur as a result of that. So it's that balance, an ongoing balance that continues to go. And this is an opportunity. This is actually occurring right now. The California Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan is a plan throughout the Southern California desert, goes across agencies, federal, state agencies, BLM, Park Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, local cities, and the goal is to come up with a plan for where renewable energy will occur. And it's not just solar, but it's wind and geothermal as well. So here's an opportunity to have an influence for you to take a look. How many of the people in this audience are reading part of that 10,000 page document? April, all right. A good number. Thank you for your input for that. That is a chance to influence what happens in our area. How do we maintain connectivity of habitat? How do we protect those night skies? How do we protect view sheds for the park? And I also wanted to mention that on November 21st, the next Black Rock lecture is actually focused on renewable energy. So you will hear more about the DRECP and other kind of focused. So sign up for your tickets with Meg. Did you catch that? And then the last thing I wanted to kind of talk about was, going beyond just regional influences, but it's climate change. We know that climate changes are occurring now. We have records that especially the nighttime lows are not as low as they used to be. So temperatures are rising. We have more awareness that, in the desert, we don't know how that's going to be manifested with precipitation, but precipitation is likely going to change. We've been working with UC Riverside on modeling, trying to understand how is the vegetation and plants in the park going to be affected by climate change. And climate change is one of those things, we can't necessarily do a lot about immediately. We can't fix it like we do graffiti, but we can try to understand the impacts on the park. And this is where we have some of our long-term monitoring projects going on. And I wanted to echo, we wanted to actually thank the college for the partnership. Professor Paul Delaney has worked with us on an insect project. The Smithsonian Institution contacted us and said, hey, we'd really like to collect some insects and understand the populations that are out there. And we worked with the college to have students come out and help with that project. And that's related to climate change because it sets a baseline, things that we didn't know that much about insects before, which was where there's some potential for some new species that are being discovered. And it sets an understanding for, okay, in 2012, 13, and 14, what's there now? How is that going to change into the future? So those are all things, I hope that gives you a little bit of a picture about resources, what we do, some of the concerns, that balance we try to work with. So with that.
Thank you very much. What an amazing level of dedication on all of your parts. Thank you so much. So I'm wondering if the panel, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about maybe the difference between the traffic patterns at Joshua Tree National Park. I've only been here a couple of months myself, and so a desert park is very different than maybe some of the other national parks we have around. Can you address just maybe the differences or the challenges that you have with the traffic patterns that are in the park?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Can you all hear me on? The typical visitation at a national park is summertime visitation. and sometimes with a concentration at Christmas. Joshua Tree is just the opposite of that, which is great for us because we can always pick up great seasonal rangers during the winter season because they're all fleeing from Yellowstone and Glacier and places like that in Alaska, and we get them in the wintertime. Much larger concentration at this park of senior citizen visitors and foreign visitors as well than a typical Yellowstone Yosemite type national park. There must have been some German marketers that were out and they were really prolific about 25 years ago because they sold Joshua Tree with Baghdad Cafe and all these other films that were published 20 years ago. So that now, you go up to Keys View on any given day and it's more likely you're going to be hearing German and French than you're going to be hearing English, especially in the summertime. Does that help explain it, Jeff, a little bit?
Yes, absolutely.
Do you have anything to add, guys?
But, the one thing I would add is about pattern of transportation. Can people hear in the back? With just my voice? So one of the things I think we notice is that because of our proximity to Los Angeles, we have a lot more of, it's a circle route. They may come out and drive in through Joshua Tree, out through Cottonwood, or if they like to drive counterclockwise, they'll go the opposite direction. That makes, one of the things we've looked at with climate-friendly parks is transportation, public transportation. Could we do some kind of a shuttle thing? What could we do to reduce the carbon that's released just by our visitors driving around in the park? And that makes those kind of circuitous driving makes a shuttle system more difficult, but it is something we are starting to look at or starting to consider. We had a transportation study done not too long ago, and it's just the beginning of an idea. A long ways from it, but something we think about relative to transportation.
Great, thank you. So we have a question from Heidi Saunders. What do we do about people taking tortoises out of the park?
Arrest them.
That's for you guys.
Well,
I took my dog.
do you want me to tell you how I feel in my gut about that? So just a short story. When I was 7, my father came back from the desert. He was doing construction at the time, and he gave me Santa Fe, my first desert tortoise, as a gift that he had acquired that he'd stolen from the California desert. That may have been possible in 1972, but today, with the sheer numbers of people living in Southern California, it is not possible. We cannot do that, and it's that's why we have patrol rangers. That's why all of our rangers are enabled to contact visitors and say, maybe you didn't know about this, madam, but when you go through customs going back into France with that desert tortoise, they're not going to let you take it, and you're breaking the law, and can you put that down right here and educate them as well. So I'd like to empower all of our staff to be able to do that, but we need your help too. Our visitors, you have friends that are in the park all the time. You need to be able to step up and say, hey, that's not all right. I was hiking in a Rattlesnake Canyon 4 days ago, and sure enough, there's a guy with his dog running off leash, and my job as a park ranger is to tell him, hey, you probably didn't know about this, but this is where the bighorn sheep go for the water this time of year, and your dog urinating all over the place is going to freak the bighorn sheep out, and they're not going to come back here, and you're going to kill them in the process. I can do that, but you can do that too, in a nice way. So I guess empowering our friends to help us is the best answer to that. Do you have anything else?
No, that's
Okay.
You did great.
Thanks.
Well, the questions are stacking up here, so I'm not sure if we'll get to all of them, and I apologize if we don't get to your question. Let's see. From Tim, what is the plan for continued climbing and hiking access and improvements for this next decade?
Do you want me to take that one too?
Right.
So we had a backcountry management plan that dealt with climbing that was approved and published about 12 years ago. 13?
It was in 2000.
2000, so that's 14 years ago. We're still trying to implement that plan. It is my intention that that plan will be implemented the next year or so. We have 250,000 visitors a year coming into the park to climb there. I know, I'm one of them. I appreciate that this is one of the major recreational ways that people enjoy Joshua Tree. I also understand that we have close to 600,000 acres of wilderness, and that backcountry management plan was designed to protect those areas of wilderness. So we're going to have to make sure those areas are protected. So that means implementing the plan. It means working with our staff. It means working with the climbing community, and it means following through and actually having the resources to enforce those rules, something we've not had for a very long time. I promise you, we are going to have those resources in the coming year or 2 years, actually, to patrol those areas.
And I'll add, relative to hiking, there are 270, I think, 1 miles of hiking trails identified in that backcountry plan and wilderness plan. And those trails are maintained by the park to varying degrees depending on use. But those are something that will be continued as well. So, fill out the hiking part.
Okay. Here's a question from Cynthia. In 50 years, how will climate change affect the Joshua Tree populations in the park?
I can do that one.
You.
So we actually have been looking at this pretty closely, and working with Cameron Barrows down at UC Riverside, he did some modeling work for us looking at a variety of plant and animal species to understand how climate change, even if we don't know much about precipitation, could affect those different distributions. And for Joshua Tree, there is some concern that most of the models show that the population will shrink. It will, and it could shrink pretty substantially. Now, this is in the long term. You know, they have a very narrow range of temperatures that they can use that are, it's not too cold, it's not too hot, it's just the right precipitation, and you get the right temperature at the right time of year. So they can bloom, and the Yakimas will do their thing with them. So it's a very narrow range. So what we're starting to see already is that at the lower elevations for Joshua trees now, there's not as much reproduction of young. It tends to be mostly adult, mature individuals, not much recruitment, or the younger trees. Whereas at the higher elevations up near Covington Flats, plenty of reproduction still going on and still continuing. So I think that's what we're going to continue to see over time. And here I'll do another plug for volunteers. Whoever planted that question, good job. We actually have a project that's called, it's a phenology project. And it's one where we have on set trails in certain locations, we are looking for volunteers who could come out and look at certain species. Joshua tree is one of them. Phenology means the change over time in blooming and growth. So, you know, when does it bloom over the course of time? Is it blooming earlier and earlier? For different species, when do they seed? How is that changing over time? So this is the beginning of and we've been doing this for a couple years, a very long-term data set to really document those changes that are going to occur. So if you want to study Joshua trees and how they are changing and be a part of that process, we'll be glad to accommodate you.
Very good, thank you. Jenny, does climate change come into play in the interpretation of the park?
It should. In the past, we have not had, I hate to keep going back to staff, we haven't had the staff to do the amount of programs, the breadth of programs that we'd like to do. But that is changing. And with our long-range interpretive plan, when I mentioned topics of national significance that are affecting Joshua Tree, the first thing that comes to mind is climate change and finding out, as a whole park, how do we tell that story? How do we, as the mouthpiece of the park, how do we go out and share that information so that just a random visitor from Topeka comes in and knows I just had to throw that out for you. Knows nothing about, I'm not saying probably people from Topeka know about climate change, but that was for his benefit.
Honestly, they
Pittsburgh,
don't, so
I'm from
sorry.
Pittsburgh. So, you know, and that we're able to help them understand in their terms, help them understand that they can make a difference and that this is going on in this park that they've come across the country to see or across the world to see, or for our local visitors to empower them, as Andrea is saying, to go out and volunteer and do their part. And so right now, it isn't an active part of our program, but that will be changing in the next year. That's one of the challenges we face, and that's one of the ones we're meeting head on. We do have some school curriculum that does focus on climate change, but we hope to actually augment that as well. So it will be getting better, and that's part of our plan for 2015.
Thank you.
Sir.
A question from Brian. Do park fees stay with the park or just go to the park service?
The way Congress has designed the law, 80% of what we collect at Joshua Tree stays in Joshua Tree. Congress has also dictated how that money is to be spent. They like to see it spent on projects as much as possible that benefit the public. So when we first got the legislation back in '96, man, there were a lot of toilets that were built across the United States. Yeah, there's the ubiquitous toilets you will see at every national park, which is a very good design, by the way, because the stovepipe on the top is painted black, so it heats up in the day and it sucks out all the smell. So our toilets smell really good in general. But we ran through and got a lot of those projects done. To be honest with you, I would love for Congress to revisit this and allow us more authority to pay for operations as well. Now, with the legislation and the rules that we just recently received, it looks like for our camping fees, we'll be able to pay for a lot more interpreters that will actually be able to give programs in Indian Cove and at Jumbo Rocks. One of the things we're allowed to do is human-wildlife interactions. So that will allow me to pay for more protection rangers to actually be on the road when people are feeding coyotes to talk to people and educate them. Or when those dogs are running loose up rattlesnake, to be able to justify hikers going in those locations. So we do have a little bit more flexibility, but we're expecting about 80% of that money is spent inside the park. With a $5 increase, we're looking at about $1 million we'll be able to spend in the park in the coming year.
Great. For Andrea, how many species of snakes are in the park?
7. There are 7 different species, and they do range. There's a difference in the south versus the north. So, there's certain of the snakes, not all snakes.
Snakes.
Oh, I was just saying rattlesnakes. I don't know how many snakes there are. You'll have to look at our website, and there's a list there.
Melanie, do you know? Okay, we need Harold Delisle.
Bill?
20?
20 plus or minus?
Okay, 20. All right, 20 plus or minus, our previous chief of interpretation has indicated. Oh, well, then the other chief of interpretation said 21.
Okay, so I'm going to condense this one a little bit. Have the solar farms had a negative impact on the ecology of the park?
So I would say one of the things that we did with the solar farms that are going in, now these are the big ones, the small little ones that are north of the park, because those went through a different permitting process, we have not been engaged as much with those. But the bigger ones, we actually did things with the company to try to mitigate for those. So for example, during construction, during operations, they are helping with monitoring to make sure that invasive plants are not expanding into the park. So that's something that's going on during construction. Will continue into operations for a few years. We had monitoring for night skies and soundscape with the requirement that the ambient temperature or ambient conditions in the wilderness in the park were not any different as a result of the construction. With night skies, we set up agreements with them that they would try to reduce. There's certain things you can do with lights put downcast on them. Try to reduce that light reflecting into the sky. And I will have to say that this first solar, the company was pretty responsive with us to be able to help with those. So I would say the most immediate impact is actually in the visitor experience. The views that are now drastically different and will be even more so from the southeast side of the park especially. That wilderness experience, it's a different kind of a wilderness experience. There are certainly, you have discussions with people that say, wow, those wind farms in Palm Springs, that's an amazing sight. That tells me that people have different perceptions of development. And so I think that's what we're going to see, especially in areas like the southeast side of the park where we have anticipating big, extensive areas of solar development. And it also depends on working with the company and working with the BLM to make sure we don't have those impacts to the park. Some questions about cumulative in the long term. Water is a big unknown. How water impacts by all these companies collectively could impact water resources in the park. So still some unknowns with some of those resources.
Is there a timeline for the reopening of Cottonwood Trails and Oasis?
I'd love to talk about that one. So when I got the job back in beginning of July, and I got a call at the beginning of July from Park Service volunteers who were so upset about Cottonwood being closed. And then about a week later, I had a visitor from the area call me. And then as soon as I got here, I had people complaining to me. I used to live at Cottonwood. I lived there for 4.5 years. It's very special to me. That trail will be open this next week. There was it's a very special resource. As you know, it flooded 18 months ago. Lots of heavy minerals were exposed from tailing piles. They were washed down into the wash right across the trail. The trail had to be rebuilt. We were concerned about the staff rebuilding the trail and what that lead and selenium potentially and arsenic would do to them. We were concerned about children playing down there. We were concerned about artifacts that had washed down as well and those being exposed. So the consultation process, meeting with the 17 tribes that claim a legacy to the park, working with our safety officer meant a really delayed process. But I really think that not having an archaeologist at the time in the park and not having a real advocate to work and push to get it done led to such a long closure. But it should be solved on Tuesday. We will do a soft opening that day, and we'll do a formal opening on Friday. Knock on wood, unless some disaster happens in the next week. So that's my hope.
Excellent, thank you. So this question from Joe sort of relates. If fees are raised, what assurances do park visitors have that the monies will be used to hire staff and improve visitor services?
Well, you've got my promise right now, so you can hold me accountable and you can write my boss and tell them I'm a big liar if this does not happen in the next 2 years. I had to work in Washington for 2 years. I had to work in our regional office for 4 years. I know what it's like to work with bureaucrats and deal with crazy committee hearings and laws being generated and policy being generated from overreaction to things. So it's tough. I mean, these two have been struggling here at the park with the fee dollars coming in to do their work. And it gets reviewed up in San Francisco, then it gets reviewed in Washington, and it gets sent back and said, no, you cannot do this project for these 8 reasons. And then they address those 8 reasons, and it goes back to Washington and said, no, there's these 2 other reasons why it can't be done. And at this point, she's pulling her hair out because she has no money to pay for all the employees that she's put in these positions. So it is frustrating, but I am very creative. I will find every way possible to get that staffing out in the field. So it will happen. As God is my witness, if I can quote Scarlett O'Hara.
Thank you. Here's a question from Paul Delaney. How can CMC students help provide relevant interpretation themes to multicultural communities surrounding the park?
That's a wonderful question. We're just starting our partnership with our division with CMC, and I'm really excited about it because there are just so many opportunities. I met with Paul recently. I'll be meeting. Paul was sitting right there. I'm looking at him. There you are. Okay. I'll be meeting. I'm coming to a meeting. I can't remember what the meeting is. With professors from different areas, all of which feed into interpretation. Andrea mentioned the ologists. To be a park biologist, you have to be a biologist. To be a park geologist, you should be a geologist. To be a park interpreter, you could come from any number of different disciplines if you have a passion for the resources and you are able to communicate effectively. So how can we work together, especially down in Coachella? We're hoping to work together with some students from CMC, with our education staff, and really do outreach down into the areas, the underserved areas that we're not reaching right now. Some of the things we'll be doing together, we'll be sending staff down there to community areas, to churches, to youth groups, not just the schools, but finding other avenues to reach these kids and to reach these communities we're not reaching now. We'll be reprinting our park newspaper in Spanish as well as English. We'll be we're working with Meg to work with JTMPA to get some of their publications in Spanish. And so both with interpretive programming and outreach and also through curriculum-based education, we're hoping to develop this partnership by recruiting students straight from CMC who can come just down the road and work with us at the park. So.
Have you ever heard of any examples where a park is actually built into the curriculum of a school system?
A university system?
Well, like starting with the young children, in San Bernardino County, the superintendent of schools is very supportive of the cradle to career strategy and initiative. And I'm just wondering if there isn't, as incredible as this community is and as supportive, are there ways that the actual park could just be threaded into the curriculum? Or have you ever heard of anything like that?
Grand Canyon did it.
Grand Canyon, at Badlands, they're working with Pine Ridge Reservation, and when I left, we were working with Oglala Lakota College to do that very thing. We were actually recruiting high school students and bringing them in as GS1, wet behind the ear, 16-year-old park rangers, and giving them cross-divisional experience. Not everybody wants to get up and talk in front of a group of people. That's not everybody's passion. To give them that cross-discipline experience. So maybe somebody looks and says, hey, I want to be an accountant. I want to go into that area of the Park Service. But or maybe they don't even join the Park Service, but they end up teaching ecology or working for another public lands agency, but they've developed that stewardship.
So that's an excellent idea.
Yeah.
At Brown versus Board of Education, the superintendent called us in and said we would like to design a curriculum in our school district here in Topeka 501 that does that. So we'd like every fourth grader to visit the park site, and we'd like every eighth grader to visit the park site again. And then we'd like to have our high school students find some way to volunteer in the park. So that's definitely something we could do with 29 Palms or with Yucca Valley.
Absolutely.
So make it happen.
Well, right now yes. Right now we're actually reaching from preschool all the way through 12th grade. And I'll be honest with you, we can't keep that up. And so what David's suggesting with working with school districts to target certain age groups, the ones that might be not just curriculum-wise, but socially, the ages, and I only know up to 8 years old. I'm not a teacher by training, but there are certain niches where kids fall where they are more open to learning certain things. And finding those with the school districts and doing what David's saying, that's exactly what we need to do, because we can't maintain the preschool through 12th grade anymore. And then we're so spread out, we can't fully focus on those grades that the schools identify as the ones that would be the most benefit. So, you got it, boss.
Okay, let's do it.
All right.
I like it. Wouldn't it be incredible if reading, writing, science assignments were related to the park as they go through education? We're on board.
Okay,
If we can help. From April Saul for Andrea, what do you feel are the top 2 or 3 resource management challenges going forward for the park?
Only 3? Let's see. I think one, let's see, I'm trying to think how I can group things into a broad category. I actually think I am concerned about environmental ethics. How do people behave in a park? How do we relay how to protect your environment and why you should protect your environment? The increases that we're seeing in graffiti, some of it's paint, some of it is etching, which starts to get harder to get in. We've had campground projects where we planted vegetation to, make the campground better, and it just gets pulled out or cut for firewood, or I don't think that's intentional, but I think that's one of them. Climate change, I am worried, I think about. And so, like I said, some of the things we are monitoring for, but we also do some more active things actually in our partnerships. One of the things I think we can do most actively with climate change is create corridors for animals and plants to move. I think that's a really important thing. Climate change is going to change this park. 100 years, 200 years from now, while they're in their hovercrafts, the environment will be different. The distribution of Joshua trees will be smaller. We don't know how else other species are going to be affected. So I think climate change is a big one as well. Exotics, yes. I was thinking about that link with climate. There's a lot of things we don't know what's going to move and which direction it's going. We do have a problem, and I will agree, with invasive species. It's not, the desert in one way is good that way, because with so little rain and really cold temperatures, you actually start to restrict which species can survive very well there. But we still have a problem with some species that are changing the ecology already. These grasses, the non-native grasses that are so ubiquitous throughout our area, those have changed the environment already. We see a different fire regime in the park now than we used to, and that's because we have the same number of lightning strikes, but what's happening is the fires are now bigger than they used to be, because they can go from the yucca that got hit or the Joshua tree that got hit, and they spread on that carpet of grasses and just create a much bigger. So we have our approach with suppressing fires is much more active than it used to be. And those invasive species, negatively, especially if they become a strong monoculture, can really change the ecology of a system. Okay, so now that's 3. I guess I'll stop. Ask me later if you want more.
Thank you. From Jim Spots, do you have an update on the Eagle Mountain issue?
Which one? There are so many different issues going on with Eagle Mountain right now. Our biggest concern from a park perspective is if they do the pump storage system there, that has the potential to deplete all the water resources in the Pinto Basin, east. So that's the most terrifying for me right now. Our director in Washington, he would love to see a lot of that land conserved as either a conservation unit or a national park part of the park if there's an expansion sometime. So that's where a lot of our motivation comes from as park managers right now. How do we protect those areas as parkland? But man, there are a lot of interests out there. There's a lot of people pulling in different directions right now, and not a lot of hard there's not a lot of hard information right now of where we're going. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think that's, I would say the landfill is dead as far as we know. That ended with LA Sanitation withdrawing. There is no other viable landfill proposal anywhere than anybody we've talked to. So that part's good. Yay.
Yay. So one of the 4.
The pump storage project is a concern, and they're actually, I'll do a slight correction. They actually, most of their withdrawal for water will be in the Chuckwalla Basin, not the Pinto Basin. But those 2 aquifers are in hydrogeologic communication. It's like 2 little bowls, right? So, withdrawing the Chuckwalla Basin down is going to affect the Pinto Basin a little bit as well. The extent, we're not sure, and there's a lot of conflict between the analysis we did on it and what FERC the analysis that they completed, so we agree to disagree on that one.
So Andrea told me something really fascinating about those aquifers. The amount of recharge they get right now is basically nothing. They've not been recharged in scores and scores of years. So that water is prehistoric, water that is, slowly serving those springs and oases in that portion of the park. To deplete those means that they are depleted for good. They will never be recharged again. It's all right. Siri's also concerned about it as well.
So I think that's a good summary for what we know for that area right now. A lot of discussions still going on with Kaiser, BLM, and other groups trying to decide and trying to develop a plan for that area.
Thank you. For Jenny, I work at a middle school about 40 plus miles from the park. Our school has a STEM grant. Besides brochures, do you have visual technology to assist me to sell the park to the school district?
Absolutely. See me afterward. I will direct you to different things that we have on our website. We have so much that we can give you through our teacher packets. We can come and talk to your school with you. We're happy to do that. Whoever it is, please come and talk to me afterward, and we can provide what you need, including a body. So.
And sometimes the superintendent likes to visit school classrooms as well if he happens to be traveling in that area. So maybe we can hook that in.
That sounded like a firm commitment.
Yeah. You're welcome. And honestly, one of the problems, and you probably know this, one of the biggest problems facing schools isn't that they don't want to come to Joshua Tree National Park. It can cost anywhere from $600 to $1,200 to rent a bus for one day, a school bus, to bring 60 students into the park. That's an enormous sum of money for some of these schools. And that's a huge deterrent to getting kids immersed in the resource at Joshua Tree National Park. We're working with a lot of our partners. We can't fundraise. We're working with people who can. We're working with JTMPA on grants to try to get more busing of kids into the park. And I think I saw some people nodding that is a huge deterrent. We can go a day's drive to a school, but it's not the same as bringing those students into the park and letting them see a Joshua tree and touch the tree and hike on the trail and feel the dirt on their legs as they hike. It's not the same thing. And so our partnerships are helping us. We need more. We need to find more ways to bring those students into the park. Nature Bridge is one way, but that's again just for the residential experience. How do we get local kids whose schools can't afford it? So we're going to look to all of you to help us with that as well.
From Anthony Bowers, and I'll kind of paraphrase, are there strategies to deal with the helium, the Mylar balloon issues in the park?
So I decided when I lived here that Joshua Tree is a magnet that pulls in balloons from around the world, because you could be in the middle of the desert and you would find this string of balloons, from Long Beach, that had, somehow made it to the Pinto Mountain. So there is no strategy to remove them. The magnet is still there. It's still sucking them in, and I don't know why Joshua Tree is so magical about sucking in the balloons.
Prevailing wind.
Yes.
We each just commit to picking them up every time we find them in the desert.
So my daughter is running around somewhere with Meg right now, but she's committed to 3 pieces of litter every day of her life, no matter where she is. So you'll see her picking up cigarette butts in 29 Palms. And I think all of us, I pull over my car in the park. I try to get 3 pieces a day too. So all of us should.
Thank you.
And to expand a little bit, one of the things we have done in the past is if we learn about events where they're planning to do or would like to do a Mylar or even a balloon release, we try to contact them and ask for alternatives. So we've done this with some of our local schools, that they could do bubbles instead or some other symbol rather than a bunch of balloons into the air. So that's one thing we've kind of been working on and will continue to do as well, and that's actually through Jenny's group.
And then, actually, one of Andrea's staff, I don't know if you've been in, where is it right now? It's a Joshua Tree?
It's at Joshua Tree.
There is a balloon tree that one of Andrea's staff created. It's incredible. She made a frame out of chicken wire and filled it with balloons that she had found over probably a year in the park.
There's
And
a lot
then-
of people collecting them.
Yeah, and then, of course, the Joshua Tree, it has cans, Mountain Dew mostly, that she also found lying around the park. And it's really rather deadly. Don't get too close to it. But we had it
Are you
cordoned
saying
off.
that Mountain Dew people litter more than others?
Well, they're green. They were more
They're
visible.
green,
My Diet
yes,
Coke.
they were.
But just getting that message out, both certainly in curriculum-based programs, but having that in the visitor center, it's an odd thing to see. You don't walk in and expect this tree made out of trash, but it's very evocative, and people ask about it. And so we're able to reach more people. And if one of those people goes back to San Diego and tells their family, hey, let's not do balloons for our next birthday party, then we've made a difference. So definitely what Andrea's saying, if you hear about organizations that are planning to release balloons, let us know, and we'll gently call them and chat with them and offer them solutions.
So our last question from the audience, how many interpreters do you have? What role can volunteers play to allow the interpreters maximum person-to-public interactions?
I'm adding in my head.
Okay.
We're in the process of hiring seasonals. 6, 7, 8. I'm going to say around 20 right now, and we're probably going to be seeing a few more seasonal employees come on. And when I say that number, we're actually divided into 4 branches. We have the branch of operations, which runs the visitor centers, does the programs. We have the branch of education, which goes into the schools. We have the branch that is outreach and volunteers, and that's the branch of 1. That's George, for those of you who know George. But that branch of 1 brought in 47,000 volunteer hours in 2014. And then we have the branch of non-personal services, which is exhibits, the internet, and probably our greatest reaching tool right now is that branch where we're going out and reaching people via the internet. That's simply the way of the world right now. We're very fortunate to have some volunteers coming in who are paid seasonal rangers in a park that is flip-flop season from us, and they'll be coming in, 2 of them, and working 32 hours a week. So basically 2 full-time employees almost, and helping us at the visitor center so that we can send paid rangers out to range, send them out to go out and meet the people and do interpretive programs. The staff is smaller than we need, but they are so dedicated, and I just can't say enough about the dedication of the people who work in our division, and they'll come in on their day off. They'll come in if they hear there's something cool going on. They'll come on and they'll volunteer their time and help. So we don't have enough, but what we have is a very passionate crew.
I'd like to say that I like to think we have about 100 paid interpreters on our staff, because every Park Service employee should be an interpreter. That should be the base knowledge and foundation that they all have. I expect the same out of all of our volunteers, and frankly, I expect the same out of all of our friends. The folks that work for the association, they should be considered as interpreters. We need to give them the skills they need to be good interpreters, because it is a skill, but man, when I went to Seasonal Law Enforcement Academy in my first year in the Park Service, the guy who was there, Bill Orr, he was probably 80 at the time, he said, the first step you're going to do as a law enforcement ranger is you will use interpretation and education. That is the most important foundation of everything you do. He smoked a lot.
It's pretty good.
But it's the truth. You de-escalate. That's what we do as law enforcement rangers and resource managers and interpreters. You try to de-escalate situations and educate folks so that they can make the right decisions in the future and do it in a way that's not patronizing or rude or condescending.
And of course, JTMPA is at our visitor center desks every day. They're there when we can't be there, and so you'll always see a presence in our visitor center. It may not be green and gray, it may be JTMPA, it may be a volunteer, but there will be a presence, a very knowledgeable, very dedicated presence in our visitor centers.
Thank you. So we've just got about 10 minutes left, and I would like to give each of you the opportunity to just make a closing comment on something maybe we didn't cover, something you would like to just let the folks know. Andrea, you want to start?
Wow.
Let's see. You have something in mind already?
I got to come up with something really quickly too. It's going to be motivational.
Jenny can start.
Jenny.
Wow. My mom wanted to name me Gabriella. My dad didn't let her because he said they'd call me Gabby. They called me Gabby anyway. And my name's Jenny. Truly, the one thing that I think we can do across the board in our park, all of our employees, as David said, specific to my division, though, is to remember that for the park service, not just Joshua Tree, but for the park service to remain relevant to future generations, for us to matter as much in the next 100 years as we've mattered in the last 100 years, we have to help people understand why what we're protecting is important. It's one thing to have it, to protect it, to know that it's there. That's great for those of us who are park junkies, and that's probably 99% of the people in the room. But we have to remember, of the almost 1.4 million people who come to Joshua Tree National Park, they may just be passing through. They may not be park junkies. We have to be that voice. We have to be able to share why the things that we protect so dearly are important so that they can then go home. And maybe they'll never come back to the California desert, but maybe they'll go to a small historic park in Pennsylvania, to Johnstown Flood, for example, where I started. And maybe they'll recognize that arrowhead and they'll say, oh, wait, that's a national park. And maybe they'll go and volunteer there. And maybe they'll go to a BLM site or a Forest Service site. But maintaining that relevance for our public lands as a whole is so very important if we are to survive into the next century and have as much effect on the world as we did in the last.
That was really good. So one of the gigs I got to work is I went to D.C. and I was the Bevinetto Fellow, which means I worked for the House Committee on Natural Resources for 2 years, which was an amazingly heady opportunity because you're with all these really smart 20-year-olds who are convinced they know so much more than you will ever know, and they are way more important than you will ever be, and they're quite happy to tell you that. I was there in 2010 when the Republicans retook the House, and I'd been working for the Democrats at the time. It didn't matter who we worked for; it was whoever was in the majority, because in the House, it's the majority that you work for. But after that, I worked for Congressional Affairs, and I had to go meet with all these new members of Congress, and my section. There were 40 new members of Congress that came in that I had to go meet with, and I was like, wow, these people. I've been listening to their campaigns. They hate the parks. They hate the government. They hate federal employees. And I'm going to go in there and I'm a federal employee. This is going to be really nasty. And I went in there, and I think 39 of the 40, they sat down with me and they said, "What can I do to help the park in my district?" They love the parks in their districts, because their district, they take pride in that. They take pride in Morristown and Jonestown and Johnstown, and whatever their park happens to be. I had the opportunity to meet with Mr. Cook's representative the other day, and he is so engaged in this park because it means so much to him. I would encourage you as citizens, contact your elected representatives. Let them know how you feel. They need to hear that on a constant basis. Don't be ashamed. Stop by their office. They've got offices all over the place. Stop by their office, write them a letter. I'd say stop by the office is even better because they're forced to talk to you. So that's the way to do it. But stay active that way because you are the advocates. I can't be political. The Hatch Act prevents me from actually doing things like that. So there's public laws that prevent any of us from asking for money or being political, but there's nothing preventing you all from doing it. So use that right and obligation and privilege.
And the last thing I'll just mention is I know just by you being here tonight that you love Joshua Tree National Park. And I would say there's some amazing things happening there. Keep being that voice for the park. We had a lichen survey done recently over the past couple years, and one of our botanists was looking at a spot with a researcher, and she said, "I don't recognize this one." It was a new species, and they named it after her. We had some biodiversity surveys where we looked at the oases of the park, and real specifically at the insects that are there. There are some new species that certainly their range, they provided more information on their range, but some new species that have not been recorded before. There's some amazing things out there. So do take time and enjoy it, and pass on that advocacy to others that you spend time with.
I think this has been an amazing evening and some very, very good questions from the audience. So thank you very much, and thank our panelists again. Thank you very, very much. So the next lecture will be November 21st, and the topic renewable energy development with panelists Chris Clark, James Andre, and April Saul, and the moderator will be Fraser Haney from the Mojave Desert Land Trust. So please join us. Take an opportunity to visit our partners. And again, thank you very, very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Jeff.